The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going on for 6 hours, and nobody had any good news to share Ambassador Telvash. Of the Varani stood at the central podium with her forearms trembling, and her usually bright blue skin had faded to a sickly gray color that everyone in the chamber recognized as a sign of deep distress. 3 more colonies have fallen, she said, and her voice cracked with emotion that no translator could hide. The Chronox swarm has killed 2 billion of my people in the last standard month, and our projections show that the Varani homeworld has perhaps 2 weeks before they arrive there. The massive circular chamber held representatives from 47 different species, and every single one of them looked uncomfortable because they all knew what was coming next. The military liaison from the Vexian Empire stood up, and his scales clicked together in what humans would have recognized as a nervous gesture. Ambassador, my people have sent 3 full battle fleets to assist your defense, and the swarm destroyed all of them, and we lost over 15,000 ships and the lives of millions of our finest warriors. A murmur went through the chamber because everyone had seen the battle recordings, and they had all been shocked by what they witnessed. The Chronox swarm was unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced before, and they were not a civilization or even a species in the traditional sense, but rather a hive mind that consumed entire worlds and converted all biological matter into more warriors. Their ships were grown rather than built, and they adapted to every weapon fired at them, and after just a few exchanges of fire, their shields would become nearly impenetrable to whatever had damaged them. The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years, and in all that time they had never encountered a threat they could not handle through diplomacy, or if necessary, through their combined military might. But the Chronex swarm did not negotiate, and they did not stop, and they did not care about galactic law, or ancient treaties, or the sanctity of life. They just consumed everything in their path. Tovash looked around the chamber with desperate eyes. I am not asking for more ships, she said quietly. I know the Council has already sacrificed too much trying to help my people, and I am grateful for every life that was risked on our behalf. She paused and took a shaking breath. I am here to ask permission to contact the humans. The chamber exploded into chaos. Representatives jumped to their feet, and dozens of voices shouted at once in a cacophony that the translation system struggled to keep up with. Absolutely not, roared the Kelvani delegate, whose species prided themselves on military tradition. The humans are dangerous and unpredictable and barely civilized. They have been council members for only 10 years, added the Prixian ambassador, whose people had been members for over 4,000 years. We barely understand their psychology or their motives. They come from a Class 12 death world. Someone else shouted, and that classification made several representatives physically recoil in their seats. Death worlds were planets so hostile to life that the fact anything evolved there at all was considered miraculous, and they were classified on a scale of 1 to 15, with anything above a 10 being considered essentially uninhabitable. Earth had been classified as a 12. When the first survey team had visited it, and they had been absolutely horrified by what they found, Day Planet, where the atmosphere itself was corrosive to most galactic species, and where the gravity was 40% higher than standard, and where tectonic activity caused regular earthquakes, and where storms could level entire cities, and where the local predators hunted in packs with sophisticated tactics. And somehow humans had not just survived there, but had thrived, and had built civilizations, and had split the atom, and had reached for the stars when humanity had been offered limited council membership a decade ago. It had been controversial because while they were technologically impressive and diplomatically friendly, there was something about them that made other species nervous. They smiled too much even in dangerous situations, and they had entire cultural concepts built around something they called extreme sports, where they deliberately put themselves in danger for entertainment. And their military history was a never-ending series of conflicts where they had fought each other with terrifying creativity and enthusiasm. Council had eventually decided that keeping humanity close was safer than leaving them isolated, but they had also quietly agreed to never request human military assistance unless absolutely necessary. Have waited for the chaos to die down before speaking again. I understand your concerns, she said, and her voice was steady now. I have read all the reports about humanity, and I know they are strange and sometimes frightening to us." She looked directly at the council high speaker, who had remained silent throughout the debate. "But my people are dying, and the swarm cannot be stopped by conventional means. And if there is even a chance that the humans, with their Deathworld adaptations and their unconventional thinking, can help us, then I must take that chance." The high speaker was a Draven elder whose species had founded the council thousands of years ago and whose wisdom was legendary. And he sat in silence for a long moment with his multifaceted eyes, reflecting the light from the chamber's central hologram, which showed the advancing Kronak swarm in sickening detail. "The humans frighten us," he finally said, and his voice carried to every corner of the massive chamber, "because they do not think like we do, and they find joy in things we find terrifying. And they solve problems in ways we would never consider." He paused and looked at Telvash with something that might have been sympathy. "But perhaps that is exactly what we need right now." The vote was close, but the council granted permission to send a message to Earth, and Telvash composed it herself, with her hands shaking. As she typed to the government of Earth and humanity, it began: "The Galactic Council requests military assistance against an existential threat to multiple member species. And the Kronak swarm is proven immune to all conventional military responses, and we are facing the extinction of entire civilizations. And we humbly ask for whatever aid you can spare, and time is critical as millions die each day." She sent the message and then waited, because even with faster-than-light communication, it would take hours for the message to reach Earth and more. Hours for any response to come back. The response arrived in 4 hours, and it was short enough that Telvash read it 3 times to make sure she had not misunderstood. "Fleet en route in ETA 72 hours, and bring popcorn." Nobody on the council knew what popcorn was, and the human liaison who had been assigned to the council had taken vacation time to visit his homeworld and was not available to explain. Vision forwarded the message to the full council and added her own note: "They are coming." The high speaker read the message and felt a mixture of hope and dread. Humanity was either about to save them all or make everything much worse, and knowing humans, it would probably be both. The Kronak swarm had been advancing toward the Varani, its homeworld, for 3 weeks, and every defensive position had fallen before them like sand. Castles before a tsunami, the swarm's hive mind calculated probabilities with cold precision and assigned a 99.7% chance of total conquest within 6 standard cycles, and the remaining 0.3% was reserved for statistical anomalies that their vast intelligence could not quite account for. Humanity was about to become that anomaly. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TDF Indomitable Spirit and watched the countdown timer tick towards 0 as her fleet prepared to drop out of faster-than-light travel, and she was drinking coffee from a mug that said "Gravity is a harsh mistress," which several of her crew had given her as a joke. "Admiral, we are approaching the drop zone," her navigator announced. "All ships report ready." Chen nodded and set down her coffee mug in the holder that had been specifically designed to keep it stable. "During combat maneuvers, take us in hot, people, and let's make an entrance." The third expeditionary fleet consisted of 12 fleet carriers, each holding over 200 fighters and 47 destroyers, bristling with enough weapons to make a small moon nervous, and 1 flagship dreadnought that massed just over 12 million tons. And they were about to do something that every other spacefaring species in the galaxy considered suicidal. "Dropping in 3-to-1 mark," the navigator called out. The fleet emerged from FTL space well inside the Varani Star System's gravity well, which was supposed to be impossible because the gravitational forces should have torn their ships apart, or at minimum thrown them wildly off course. Instead, the human ships appeared in perfect formation, less than 2 light minutes from the Varani homeworld, and immediately began accelerating toward the Kronak forces that were advancing on the planets and every council ship in the system. Alarms started screaming as their sensors registered what had just happened. "That is impossible," gasped the Vexian fleet commander, who was observing from his flagship in high orbit. "Their ships should be debris, and how did they calculate those coordinates, and what kind of navigation computer can handle those variables?" His science officer was frantically checking and rechecking her readings. "Sir, I am not detecting any malfunction in our sensors," and they really did drop out of FTL inside the gravity well, and their formation is perfect to within 0.001%. And I have no explanation for how they accomplished this. Telvash was on the same ship, and she watched the holographic display with wide eyes as the human fleet appeared like magic. They said they would arrive in style. She whispered, "I think this is what they meant, Admiral." Chen opened a channel to all frequencies, both human and otherwise. "Attention all vessels, and this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, and we are here in response to the Galactic Council's request for assistance." She paused, and her next words were delivered with perfect timing. "Sorry we are late, and traffic was absolutely murder." Several of her bridge crew snickered because humans had a habit of making jokes even in life-or-death situations. Jen continued. "Kronak swarm forces, and this is your one and only chance to withdraw from this system, and we would really prefer if you did not take it, because my crew has been cooped up in FTL for 3 days and they are eager to stretch their legs, so to speak, but regulations say I have to offer." The swarm responded exactly as she had expected, which is to say they attacked with everything they had. The hive mind did not understand humor or bluffing or psychological warfare, and it interpreted Chen's words as a sign of weakness and uncertainty. 3,000 Kronak IO ships changed course and accelerated toward the human fleet with their weapons already charging and their adaptive shields configured based on data from previous battles against Council forces. "Well, that is disappointing," Chen said cheerfully. "All ships weapons free, and launch all fighters, and let's show them how Earth does things." The carriers opened their launch bays, and fighters began pouring out in streams of metal and fury, and there were thousands of them. And each one was piloted by a human who had volunteered for this mission. The Varani observers expected to hear military discipline and crisp tactical communications, but instead, the fighter channel was chaos. "Dibs on the big one," called out a pilot with the calcine mongoose. "No way, I already called it," responded Firefly. "You can have the ugly one." "Oh wait, they are all ugly kids, please," said an older voice. "With the calcine grandpa, there are plenty of bugs for everyone." Someone started playing music over the channel, and it was something with a heavy beat and aggressive lyrics that made the human pilots whoop with excitement. Chen smiled as she listened, because this was exactly what she wanted, and a relaxed crew was an effective crew, and humans fought better when they were having fun. First wave of Kronak ships opened fire with bioplasma weapons that had melted through Council ship hulls like butter, and they targeted the human fighters, expecting easy kills. Instead, the fighters dodged with impossible precision, and their pilots were laughing as they performed maneuvers that should have liquefied their internal organs from the G-forces that tickled. Mongoose announced cheerfully as a plasma bolt passed close enough to light up his shields. "Let me return the favor." The human fighters opened fire with a bewildering array of weapons, and some used energy beams, while others fired kinetic slugs. And still others launched missiles that seemed to think for themselves. The Kronak shields adapted to the energy weapons within seconds, just as they had against Council forces, but then the humans switched to kinetic rounds, and the shields, which had just reconfigured, were suddenly vulnerable again by the time the swarm adapted to kinetic weapons. The humans had switched back to energy, or were using plasma or lasers or particle beams, or something that looked like concentrated lightning. "How many different weapon types do these people carry?" asked a stunned Varani tactical officer as she watched the battle unfold. Human weapons officer on the observation deck grinned. "Yes," she blinked. "Yes, what? Yes, we carry that many." He explained helpfully. "We never really saw the point in specializing when we could just bring everything. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, because humans did not fight with efficiency or cold calculation, but with creativity and aggression, and something that looked suspiciously like Joya." A group of fighters deliberately let a Kronak cruiser lock onto them, and then led it straight into a kill zone where 3 destroyers were waiting, and the cruiser was obliterated in a crossfire that the fighters somehow dodged through. Mongoose, "You are showing off," Chen said over the command channel, but she was smiling. "Admiral, with respect, that is literally what we are here for." Mongoose replied, "Besides, I am only at 4 kills and Firefly has 6, and I have a reputation to maintain." They were keeping score, and they were competing with each other, and they were treating a life-or-death battle like some kind of game, and they were winning the Kronak. Swarm had never encountered an enemy like this, and their hive mind struggled to adapt because adaptation required patterns, and humans seemed allergic to patterns every time the swarm thought it understood human tactics. The humans would do something completely different, and something that made no tactical sense, but somehow worked anyway. Human destroyer disabled a Kronak capital ship by venting its reactor coolant into space and using the superheated plasma as an improvised weapon, and this was something that had never occurred to any other species, because coolant was for cooling, not for fighting another. Destroyer actually rammed a swarm ship at relativistic speed after the crew had evacuated via escape pods, and the resulting explosion destroyed for other enemy vessels. Did they just use their own ship as a missile? Telvash asked in disbelief. Yep. The human weapons officer confirmed that is actually tactic number 7 in the manual, and it is called Going Out with Style. The battle raged for 6 hours, and the Kronak swarm kept sending more ships, and the humans kept destroying them with methods that ranged from brilliant to insane, and sometimes both at once. And through it all, the human pilots and crews were laughing and joking and having the time of their lives. The Varani Command Center was filled with observers from a dozen different council species, and every single one of them was staring at the holographic battle display with expressions ranging from awe to horror to complete bewilderment. What they were watching should not have been possible. The Kronak swarm had defeated the combined military might of 17 different galactic civilizations, and their adaptive shielding technology had been specifically designed over millions of years of evolution to counter any weapon system they encountered. But the humans were not following any logical pattern, and that was making adaptation impossible, or not fighting efficiently. Observed the Kelvani military attaché, whose species had written the definitive texts on galactic warfare. They are wasting energy and ammunition and taking unnecessary risks. The human liaison officer, who had been assigned to explain human tactics to the confused aliens, was a woman named Captain Jessica Rodriguez, and she had a smile on her face that suggested she was enjoying this immensely. You are absolutely right, Commander, and they are being deliberately inefficient. But why? The Kelvani sputtered. War is about resource management and calculated risk in achieving objectives with minimum loss. Rodriguez laughed. That is how you fight, and it works great against enemies who think like you do, but the swarm adapts to patterns, right? And so the best way to beat them is to have no pattern at all. She gestured at the display where a human fighter had just performed a barrel roll that served no tactical purpose except to dodge a shot that had not even been fired. Yet humans spent most of our history fighting other humans, and we got really good at being unpredictable, because predictability gets you killed on Earth. A massive Kronak battleship was closing in on a human destroyer, and the council observers expected the destroyer to retreat or call for support, but instead it turned and accelerated directly toward the enemy ship. That ship is committing suicide. Telvash gasped. Why are they not retreating? Wait for it. Rodriguez set the destroyer opened fire with everything it had and cycled through 7 different weapon types in 15 seconds, and the Kronak shields were adapting and reconfiguring, frantically trying to keep up with the changing threat profile. Then, when the shields had finally stabilized, the destroyer fired something completely new, and it looked like a massive harpoon made of solid tungsten, and it punched straight through the confused shields and buried itself deep in the battleship's hull. Did they just use a spear? Someone asked in disbelief. Kinetic harpoon, actually. Rodriguez corrected. It is a 60-ton rod of tungsten, accelerated to point-to-light speed. No shields in the galaxy are designed to stop something that primitive, because who would be crazy enough to use a glorified spear in space combat? Humans, apparently. Telvash said, and there was something like respect in her voice. Harpoon had a surprise inside it, and 3 seconds after impact, it detonated a tactical nuclear warhead, and the Kronak battleship broke apart from the inside. That was Harpoon Tactic Charlie. Rodriguez explained helpfully, we also have Harpoon Tactic Alpha, which uses conventional explosives, and Harpoon Tactic Bravo, which releases a swarm of micro-drones, and Harpoon Tactic Delta, which is classified. The Prixian observer who had been taking notes stopped writing. How many different tactics do you people have? Rodriguez thought about it. The official manual lists about 4,000, and that is not counting the ones that individual crews make up on the spot, because humans are really good at improvising, as if to prove her point. a human fighter pilot who was being chased by 3 Chronok. Interceptors suddenly cut his engines and let momentum carry him forward while his ship rotated 180 degrees, and this meant he was now flying backward but facing his pursuers, and he opened fire and destroyed 2 of them before they could react. The 3rd interceptor tried to adapt, but the pilot had already flipped back around and accelerated away while launching a missile that curved back on itself in a spiral pattern that no swarm defense system had been programmed to counter. That move is called the Crazy Ivan. Rodriguez said, "We stole it from submarine warfare back on Earth." What fascinated the observers most was not just the human tactics, but the human attitude. And these people were in the middle of a desperate life-or-death battle, and they were acting like they were having fun. The fighter communication channel was still broadcasting to the council ships, and the observers could hear the constant chatter. 10 credits says, "I can take out that cruiser with just kinetic rounds you are on. And I bet I can do it faster with missiles. Both of you are wrong, and watch me use the laser. And also, Grandpa told me to tell you both that you are showing off." Grandpa is literally doing a victory roll right now, so he has no room to talk there. Was laughter, and someone made a comment about buying the first round of drinks. When they got back, and someone else complained that their targeting computer was being glitchy, and a 3rd voice offered to fix it if they promised to stop hogging. All the good targets. These people were keeping score and making bets and trash-talking each other in the middle of combat, and somehow it was working. A Vexian admiral, who had lost 3 fleets to the swarm, was watching with his mouth hanging open. They should be terrified, and they should be focused, and they should be disciplined, but instead they are joking and laughing, and treating this like a game that is, because to them, it kind of is a game. Rodriguez said, "Do not get me wrong, and they take the mission seriously, and they know people are counting on them, but humans have this weird ability to find joy even in terrible situations, and it is how we cope with stress." She pulled up a historical file on her datapad. "When my ancestors were fighting wars on Earth, they would sing songs in the trenches and play cards between battles and make jokes about death, because the alternative was to drown in fear, and fear makes you slow, and slow gets you killed." Another destroyer was engaging Chronok carrier, and it was using its point defense lasers, not for defense, but to systematically cut the carrier into pieces, like a chef carving a roast, and the human crew was clearly taking their time and making it artistic. They are playing with it, the Kelvani commander said, and he sounded offended. "That is disrespectful to the enemy. The enemy is trying to commit genocide." Rodriguez pointed out, "I think a little disrespect is warranted." What the council observers were slowly realizing was that human warfare was not about following rules or maintaining dignity or fighting with honor in the traditional sense, and it was about winning by any means necessary in doing it. With Stiley's squad of fighters encountered a minefield that the swarm had laid as a trap, and instead of going around it, they flew straight through it while shooting the mines and turning them into an improvised fireworks display that was completely unnecessary. Someone muttered, "But it looked cool." Rodriguez replied, "And that is important to humans, and we have a saying. If you are going to do something, you might as well do it with style." The battle continued, and the humans kept introducing new tactics and new weapons and new ways of breaking the rules that other species thought were unbreakable. They used their own ship debris as improvised shrapnel, and they hacked into Chronak communication frequencies just to play annoying music at them, and they painted nose art on their fighters in the middle of combat, and one destroyer captain ordered his ship to spell out a rude message. Using weapons fire that was visible from the planet below, are they taunting the enemy? Telvash asked, "Oh, definitely." Rodriguez confirmed psychological warfare is a human specialty, and we have been doing it for thousands of years. A massive Chronok dreadnought appeared on the edge of the system, and it was bigger than anything the humans had brought, and it was charging weapons that could destroy a planet. The council observers tensed and waited for the human fleet to show concern or fear or at least tactical caution. Instead, Admiral Chen's voice came over the command channel, sounding absolutely delighted. "Well now, and that is what I call a target-rich environment, and all ships focus fire on the new contact, and let's show them what the Third Fleet can do." And the human ships turned toward the dreadnought, not away from it, and they accelerated into danger instead of away from it. And they did it while their crews were cheering. Observers finally understood something important about humans and these Deathworlders did not just survive danger, and they thrived on it, and they had spent their entire evolutionary history turning threats into challenges and challenges into games. And now they were bringing that same attitude to galactic warfare. They are insane. The Kelvani commander whispered. Probably. Rodriguez agreed cheerfully, but they are our kind of insane. The gas giant on the edge of the Virani system was a swirling mass of storms and hydrogen clouds and radiation that would kill most organic life in seconds, and it had been there for billions of years, completely unremarkable, till something massive began to emerge from behind it. The Cronach Queen ship was a biological nightmare that had been grown rather than built over the course of centuries, and it was 3 times the size of the human flagship, and it pulsed with organic weapons and spawning chambers that could produce new warriors, even in the middle of battle. It had been hiding and waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and the hive mind had calculated that revealing the Queen ship now would break human morale and force a retreat. Hive mind had never been more wrong about anything on the bridge of the indomitable Spirit Admiral. Chen set down her coffee mug and leaned forward in her chair with an expression that her crew knew very well. It was the expression she got when she was about to do something that would either win the battle or get them all court-martialed, or possibly both. Sir, we are reading massive energy signatures from that vessel. Her tactical officer reported it is charging weapons that could crack a continent, and our shields will not hold against that kind of firepower. The council liaison aboard the Indomitable Spirit was already composing a message to recommend immediate retreat because clearly this was beyond what even humans could handle. Then he heard Admiral Chen laugh. Commander Drake, she said to her executive officer, what is our current status on that special package we have been saving? Commander James Drake was a man who had served with Chen for 15 years, and he knew exactly what she was thinking, and a slow smile spread across his face. Sir, we are fully loaded and ready to deploy on your order. Excellent. Chen said, signal all ships, pattern Delta 7. The bridge went very quiet, Admiral. Drake said, and his smile got even wider. Pattern Delta 7 is technically still classified as a war crime by the Terran Senate. Only if we use it on other humans, Commander. Chen replied, these are bugs, and last time I checked, bugs are not protected under the Geneva Conventions or any other treaty we have signed. She stood up and addressed her crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going loud, and this is what we trained for, and this is why they send us to the places where regular forces cannot go. She paused, and when we get home, I am buying the first 3 rounds. The crew Chiratelvush was watching from the observation deck, and she had spent enough time around humans to know that cheering before a suicide mission was not normal for most species. What is pattern Delta 7? She asked Captain Rodriguez. Rodriguez looked like she wanted to dance. It is the tactic we use when we need to absolutely positively destroy something and do not care about playing it safe. That is not very specific. You will see the human fleet began to move, and instead of the careful coordinated advance that galactic warfare doctrine called for, they did something that made every council observer gasp in horror. They scattered the destroyers, broke formation, and began flying erratic patterns, while the carriers launched every single remaining fighter they had, and that was thousands of fighters all moving in what looked like complete chaos. They had lost formation. A Vexian officer said in disbelief, they are vulnerable to concentrated fire, and what are they doing? What they were doing was controlled chaos at its finest. Fighters were not flying randomly, despite how it looked, and they were executing a pattern so complex that it required each pilot to be constantly adjusting based on the movements of hundreds of other ships, and it was less like a military formation and more like a school of fish or a flock of birds moving as one organism. The Cronach Queen ship could not track them. Alit's weapon systems had been designed to target organized fleets with predictable movements, but the human swarm was everywhere and nowhere, and every time a weapon locked onto one fighter, that fighter would already be somewhere else. Meanwhile, destroyers were doing something even more audacious, and they were using the system's gravity whilst to slingshot themselves at incredible speeds while firing every weapon they had. One destroyer skimmed so close to the gas giant that its hull started to glow from the heat, and then used that momentum to launch itself at the Queen ship. It's like a missile. The pilot is going to die. Telvash whispered, "Probably not." Rodriguez said, "Probably the destroyer pulled up at the last possible second and released a spread of fusion mines directly into one of the Queen ship's weapon ports, and then spun away while its engines screamed." In protest, the mines detonated and the Queen ship shuddered, but it was too massive to be seriously damaged by such a small attack, but that had never been the point. Human attacks were probing and testing and forcing the Queen ship to activate all of its defensive systems at once, and while it was distracted, the indomitable spirit was moving the massive dreadnought. It had been slowly accelerating toward the gas giant, and now it was using the planet's gravity to build up speed in a maneuver that required split-second timing and perfect navigation. "Sir, we are approaching maximum hull stress," the chief engineer reported. "If we go any faster, we are going to start losing plates." "Noted," Chen said calmly. "Continue acceleration." The indomitable spirit came screaming out from behind the gas giant, moving at a velocity that no ship that size should have been able to achieve, and it was heading straight for the Queen HFY weapon on the dreadnought. It was firing in missiles and kinetic rounds and energy beams and plasma. Bolts all converged on the Queen ship in a display of firepower that lit up the entire system the Queen ship's shields held. But they were flickering under the sustained assault, and the hive mind was calculating furiously, trying to determine the best response. Then, the indomitable spirit did something that made the hive mind experience what might have been its first moment of genuine confusion. The dreadnought did not slow down. "Sir, hull integrity at 60%. Engineering called out, "Shields are failing, and we have fires on multiple decks. Stay on target."
Ow.
Chen ordered, "Sir, we are going to hit them. That is the plan." The council observers were screaming now, and their translators could barely keep up. With a dozen languages all expressing the same sentiment of absolute terror, Rodriguez just smiled because she had seen Chen pulled this kind of stunt before, at the last possible second, when the indomitable spirit was close enough that its crew could see the organic texture of the Queen ship's hull. Admiral Chen gave the order, "Release the package." The dreadnought's forward cargo bay opened, and a stream of specially designed fusion mines poured out, and each one was fitted with magnetic clamps, and they attached themselves to the Queen ship's hull in a pattern that's been calculated by the fleet's best tacticians. There were 500 mines, and each one was powerful enough to vaporize a city block, and they were all set to detonate. In a chain reaction hard to starboard, Chen ordered, "Get us clear." The indomitable spirit's engines fired at full power, and the massive ship began to turn, but it was moving so fast that the maneuver put forces on the hull that made metal scream. The shields collapsed completely, and armor plating tore away, and sparks flew from ruptured conduits, but the ship kept turning. The Queen ship tried to target the dreadnought, but it was too close and moving too fast, and by the time its weapons locked on the indomitable spirit was already accelerating away. Chen watched the countdown timer, and at 5 seconds, she opened a channel to all frequencies. "This is for making us miss poker night," she said. The mines detonated. The explosion was visible from the Varani homeworld, and it looked like a new star had been born in their sky. Queen ship, which had survived for centuries and had conquered hundreds of worlds, simply ceased to exist. And the chain reaction tore it apart from the inside and sent debris scattering across millions of kilometers. The hive mind connection broke, and suddenly thousands of Chronok warriors lost their coordination, and they stopped functioning as a unified force and became just individual ships with no direction, all fighters' weapons free. Chen ordered, "Clean up the stragglers." Human pilots who had been waiting for this moment whooped with joy and descended on the confused enemy. Like wolves on scattered sheep, Telvash watched the human flagship limp away, trailing atmosphere and debris with fires visible through breaches in its hull. They almost destroyed themselves. She said in awe. "Just to win." Rodriguez nodded. "That is what I have been trying to explain, and humans do not quit, and we do not retreat, and we definitely do not play it safe when people are counting on us. You are all completely insane." Rodriguez agreed cheerfully, "But we win." The cleanup took another 6 hours, but it was less of a battle and more of a hunt, as human fighters chased down the scattered remnants of the Chronak swarm and eliminated them.
One by one.
Without the Queen ship to coordinate them, the individual warriors were confused and directionless, and they fell easily to the organized human assault by the time the last Kronak vessel had been destroyed. The human pilots sounded almost disappointed, that is it. Mongoose complained over the cum channel. I was just getting warmed up. Some of us have actual jobs to get back to. Grandpa replied, and also I am pretty sure my daughter is going to kill me for missing her recital. Your daughter is 32 years old. She still has recitals, and I am a supportive father, Admiral. Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit and surveyed the damage reports with the practiced eye of someone who had been in far too many battles. They had lost 8 destroyers and 43 fighters and 617 crew members had died in the battle, and another 1,000 were injured. It was a heavy price, but compared to what the Council fleets had suffered, it was a miraculous signal. The fleet she ordered begin recovery operations, and I want every escape pod located and every survivor accounted for, and engineering teams are to prioritize hull breaches and life support. Her executive officer, Commander Drake, stepped up beside her. The Council is requesting permission to send observers aboard, sir, and I think they want to see how we are still floating. Chen smiled tiredly. Tell them they are welcome aboard, but warn them that the ship is a mess, and also we are out of coffee, which means the crew is going to be cranky an hour later. Telvash and a delegation of Council observers were escorted through the corridors of the Indomitable Spirit, and what they saw was not what they expected. They had imagined a grim military vessel, full of stern warriors mourning their dead and preparing for the next battle. Instead, they found organized chaos that somehow worked in. One corridor, a repair crew was patching a hull breach while singing what sounded like a drinking song, and in another section, someone had already spray-painted graffiti on a damaged bulkhead that read Bugs 0. Humanity, still undefeated. The medical bay was full of wounded, but instead of the quiet dignity that Council medical facilities maintained, it was loud with conversation and laughter. I am telling you, I took out 15 of them before that one got lucky. A pilot with a bandaged arm was saying to his friend, you took out 12 and I was counting. 12 that you saw, and there were 3 more that you missed because you were busy showing off. I do not show off, and I execute advanced tactical maneuvers. A medic walked past carrying supplies. You both show off, and now shut up before I sedate you, Telvash. Watched in amazement as wounded warriors joked and argued and exaggerated their accomplishments, and they were clearly sad about the friends they had lost, but they were celebrating being alive with equal intensity. This is how humans grieve. Captain Rodriguez explained quietly, we remember the dead by living as hard as we can. They reached the officers' mess where Admiral Chen was waiting, and she looked exhausted but satisfied. Ambassador Telvash, she said with a small bow, welcome aboard, and I apologize for the state of my ship, but we were slightly busy, Admiral. You and your people just saved my world, Telvash said, and her voice was thick with emotion. I do not care if your ship is held together with tape, and Hope. Chen laughed. That is actually not far from the truth in some sections, and engineering is getting creative with the repairs. She gestured for them to sit, and someone brought drinks, and Chen raised her glass to absent friends. She said quietly to absent friends. Her officers echoed, and for a moment the joking stopped, and they all drank in silence. Then the moment passed, and the energy returned. Telvash had been preparing this question for hours, Admiral. I need to understand something, and why do your people fight the way you do, and you treat war like it is some kind of game, and you laugh in the face of death, and you take risks that should terrify you? Chen was quiet for a long moment, and she looked at the other council observers who were all leaning forward waiting for her answer. Do you know what Earth is like, Ambassador? She finally said, I have read the reports. Telvash replied, a Class 12 death world, where everything is trying to kill you. That is accurate, but also incomplete. Chen said Earth is beautiful and terrible in equal measure, and we have storms that can flatten cities and predators that hunted us for millions of years, and diseases that can wipe out entire populations, and earthquakes and volcanoes and droughts and floods. She paused, and her expression became distant as she remembered. And somehow we survived all of that, and we thrived, and do you know how? By being adaptable. The Vexian observer suggested. Partly, Chen agreed, but also by being stubborn, and by refusing to quit, and by learning to laugh at danger, because the alternative was to live in constant fear and fear. paralyzes you, she gestured around at her. Crew, these people are the descendants of survivors, and every single human alive today comes from a long line of ancestors who looked at impossible odds and said, not today, and who found joy even in terrible circumstances, because that is what I kept them sane. Commander Drake spoke up. My great-great-grandfather fought in the Unity Wars back on Earth, and he spent 3 years in a trench facing enemy fire every day. And you know what he did in his free time? What? Telvash asked. He wrote comedy sketches and performed them for his unit, and he made people laugh while the world was ending around them. And when someone asked him why, he said, because if I stop laughing, I will start screaming, and I will never stop. Chen nodded. That is humanity in a nutshell, and we cope with horror by finding humor, and we face death by refusing to take it seriously, and we fight with style, because if we are going to do something difficult, we might as well make it memorable. She looked directly at Telvash. But here's the important part, Ambassador. And you asked for aid, and you said your people were dying, and you were desperate, and that we take seriously the showing off and the jokes and the competition. Drake added, that is just us being us. And that is how we stay focused and effective, and that is how we process stress. But we showed up, Chen said firmly, and we will always show up when someone needs help, and even if we do it with perhaps more enthusiasm and explosions than strictly necessary. Telvash felt tears forming in her eyes. I do not understand you people, and you are strange and reckless and terrifying, but Rodriguez prompted gently, but you are also the bravest beings I have ever met. Telvash finished, and I am grateful beyond words. Chen smiled. Then let me tell you what happens next. And your world is safe, and the Kronok are broken, and they will not recover from losing their queenship for decades, if ever, in your fleet. Telvash asked, looking at the damage reports. Will be repaired, and we have already called for support ships, and in a week you will not be able to tell we were in a battle. Except for the graffiti, Drake added, that is going to stay because it is tradition. The council observers spent the next few hours touring the ship and meeting the crew. And with every conversation, they understood humanity a little better. These were not mindless warriors or violence-addicted barbarians, and they were people who loved and laughed and cared deeply about their friends and families. They just happened to come from a world that had taught them to find strength in adversity and joy in survival. As the delegation was preparing to leave, Chen pulled Telvash aside. Ambassador, we are going to be in the system for another week doing repairs, and if any other Kronok forces show up, we will handle them. But I think the survivors are running scared. What can I ever do to repay you? Telvash asked. Actually, we have a tradition, Chen said. When we help someone, we like to learn about their culture. And so if you could share your best recipes and maybe tell us some stories about your people, that would be payment enough. That is all you want. Well, Chen admitted with a grin, we would also like the rights to make a movie about this, and my crew is already arguing about who should play them in the dramatization. Telvash laughed, and it felt good to laugh after so much fear you may have that rights, and though I suspect your version will be more explosive than the reality, probably. Chen agreed cheerfully. We do like our explosions. As Telvash was leaving, she heard someone in the corridor singing, and the song was about Deathworlders and unlikely victories, and the insanity of charging into danger with a smile, she realized. That was exactly what humans did. And somehow it worked. The council would spend years analyzing the battle and trying to understand human tactics. And they would write papers and hold conferences and create new military doctrines, but they would never quite capture the essential truth that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics or even their stubbornness. It was their absolute refusal to let the universe tell them what was impossible. 3 days later, the indomitable Spirit sent a final message to the council as the human fleet prepared to return home. Mission accomplished, and Varani system secure, and no payment necessary beyond cultural exchange. And also, could someone please explain what Varani whiskey tastes like? Because our crew is very interested. The message ended with a postscript that became famous across the galaxy. Same time next week, and we will bring the popcorn.